Welcome to the Forge. Today we're going to be making a pair of pliers, probably a few pair of pliers, and I think that this is a much better beginner blacksmithing project than making your first set of tongs. After all, pliers are just mini tongs, so learning how to make pliers will teach you the technique that you need to make whatever blacksmithing tongs you want. They can also be made much more inexpensively, a lot of times with scraps or cutoffs. Here's a couple pieces of 1/2 inch square stock that I just got out of my scrap bin. They're 5 inches long, and these are going to be great to be making plier blanks. I'm going to go ahead and throw these in the fire to warm up, and while they're in there getting warm, we're going to lay out the first shoulder we need to set for these plier blanks. Now I'm just going for about a 3/4 inch offset on this plier bit, so I'm going to lay that out on a relatively sharp corner on my anvil. Now I'm going to be going slow here. I'm not looking to move a lot of material, I just want to set the shoulder, but most importantly I wanted to set the shoulder at the right distance. We're going to be making 2 of these plier blanks, and they need to match up as close to perfect as we can get them. So taking time to make sure that we get this shoulder set at the right distance is very important. This next heat, since we already have that shoulder set, we can come in with some heavier blows and move the material around. I'm looking to bring it down to about half the original thickness, which in this case is about 1/4 inch. I'm also going to be hammering on the sides just to bring it back into square. Make sure it doesn't swell out too much. Next, we're going to be setting the second shoulder. This is going to be isolating the body and setting the offset of the plier bit. Now I'm coming in here with very heavy blows because I need to move a lot of material fairly evenly pretty quickly. But this is what's going to give the plier blank the offset it needs to be able to pivot around a rivet and have the plier bits line up evenly. So we have to bring this down to half of the dimension of the original stock, which is going to be, in this case again, 1/4 inch because we started out with 1/2 inch. Since I threw a bunch of really heavy blows in there to break that material down, I'm going to take a little bit of time just to clean it up, kind of go back over, make sure everything is still square and in line to each other. I don't want the bit to have gotten twisted, and I don't want there to be uneven thickness in the plier body or the offset that we just set up. Now we're going to be setting the third shoulder. This shoulder is the exact opposite of the first shoulder with the plier bit. This is going to be isolating the handle material. You can really see now how that plier body is well defined. Now we have these opposing shoulders in. And these are the 3 critical shoulders for making a pair of pliers. There's the first shoulder to set up the bit, the second shoulder to put in an offset and create a plier body, and then a third shoulder to isolate the handle material. Next, we're going to be bringing the handle down to size. This is going to be breaking it down and drawing it out to the shape that we want and also the correct thickness. We don't want it thicker than 1/4 inch because we need clearance for the 2 handles to close. I actually ended up with a little more material than I want. I'm not looking for super long handles here, so I'm going to go ahead and hot cut off the extra. And I'm just going to continue breaking this down and getting it into the shape that I want. Making sure that I have an even thickness and that I'm not going to have any problems with clearance when we combine these 2 plier blanks. And here you can see the 2 plier blanks. One of them, the body's a little bit larger than the other, but we're going to take that over and file it down. It also has a bit of a rough shoulder, so that won't be a problem. You can see how these are going to line up. And remember, these are 2 identical plier blanks. There's not a right one or a left one. They're both the same. Now that we're in the vise, we're going to clean up that shoulder and make it nice and crisp, and also take off a little bit of extra space so that the plier bodies line up. Back at the anvil, we're going to be putting in some center marks so that when we move on to punch our hole for the rivet, we're going to be getting it in the right spot. This really helps when you get to the punching phase because you have a clear mark to line up your punch with. Now that the blank is hot, we're going to go ahead and punch those rivet holes. Remember to move your punch and twist it each time. You want to come down nice and even. You don't want to keep the punch in there and overheat it. So pulling it out and twisting it usually gives you the best shot of getting through nice and straight. Once you bottom out, just flip it over and knock out that plug. Also make sure that the plier body didn't get warped or twisted during the punching process. If it did, just tap it back into alignment. Now we're going to need a tool to move on to the next step, and that tool is a drift. So we're going to be using a disposable drift. This is an old one I had from the last project I did. It's made out of this 3/8 round stock, and this is what we're going to use to make the rivet. So we need to drift open those holes in the plier blanks to exactly this dimension to accept the rivet stock. Now this drift is a one-time use. It has a long taper on the front, and that's what drives through, a good section of original material that's not touched, and then a taper at the back that will give you clearance so that you can hammer through without it binding. It's a very simple tool, so we're just going to go ahead and knock out a new one so we can use for this project. Throw my 3/8 round stock in the fire, and as soon as it's ready, we're going to take it out and put a quick taper on the business end of it. This is just a simple taper, very common. I'm sure you already know how to do this. Taper it square, and then once you have the taper the right length, come back and round it off. Take your time with rounding. You want to make sure that this is as clean of a round as you can get so that it doesn't bind up or tear when you're trying to drift it through the hole in the plier blank. Once it's nice and rounded, I'm going to cut off the excess material, and then I'll come back here and I'll put a little taper at the end, again, to make sure that it doesn't bind as it's passing through the hole. Now, I know everybody always tells you never hit cold metal. It's basically a sin as a blacksmith. But there is a practical reason why I'm doing this. So I'm hammering the long taper on the front of this temporary drift, or this disposable drift, to work harden it. Now, that's not going to add a ton of durability, but it'll help a bit. And that'll mean that it's got a better chance of surviving through both of these plier blanks. Once you start hammering it through, as soon as you start feeling it stick, flip that over and get it out of there. This is just mild steel. It'll tear itself apart if you force it through. Once the drift passes all the way through the first time, go ahead and throw that plier blank back in the fire. Although we made it through, we're going to want to pass that drift through at least 4 more times. So I'm going to pass it through once when it's at a high orange heat. Then I'm going to pass it back through again when it's at a low orange. Pass through a 3rd time at a dull red. And pass it through one final time when it's at black heat. This way we make sure that when the plier blank is cooling down and constricting, that the drift can still make it through. Alright, so I took the plier blanks over to the grinder and ripped off that really rough scale. I probably should have been brushing these a little more frequently, but the grinder got through it no problem. So we're going to go ahead and do some measuring here. And if we did our job right, this will be at a 1/2 of an inch. Remember, we were supposed to break these plier bodies down to 1/4 inch each. And sure enough, we're at a 1/2 inch, which is great. The next step is preparing our rivet stock. Now I'm going to cut a rivet for 1 1/4 inches. That's the thickness that I'm riveting through plus 125%. That's going to give me a nice, relatively flush rivet. So here's the cut and prepared stock. I ground off the scale on the rivet, but I want to test it up against the blanks. As you can see, the rivet stock passes through one of the blanks, but not the other one. So we're going to have to take this blank back over and enlarge that hole. Now I'm just going to be using the hole punch to enlarge this hole very slightly. I'm just going to give it 2 light taps, and that's going to be plenty. As soon as I get this out of here, I'll test it with the rivet stock, and sure enough, looks like we're good. So we can throw this rivet in the fire. Now, something I really want to note here is that this rivet stock is very small, and that means that it's going to lose heat really quickly. I mean, you can already see how much heat the tongs are sucking out of this rivet. So be prepared to move fast when this rivet comes out of the fire. I've already got my plier blanks all lined up, so I'm going to get the rivet in here as quick as I can, but I'm going to be using the bounce or bump technique for setting this rivet. I don't want to hold the rivet against the anvil because the anvil will just suck all the heat out of it. So I'm trying to bounce it and time my hammer blows with the rivet touching the anvil. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's a good way to get a rivet set without having to make yourself a monkey tool or some other kind of preform. Kind of down and dirty, but it works. So we've got a little bit of a problem. You can see that the rivet kind of bananaed on me so that it's more closed on one side and less on the other. There's a bit of a gap. I'm not really worried about that because I'm going to be able to fix that. Now, first thing I'm going to do is finish setting this rivet. I want to make sure that it's peened over properly all the way around on both sides. Once I'm pretty happy with that, I'm going to take these to the edge of the anvil and I'm going to close up that gap where it bananaed on me. Now that I've got that, I'm just going to kind of come back through, clean things up, try to make it a little even, a little more attractive. Also, I noticed that the bits here are a little twisted, so I'm going to try to tweak those a bit and bring them into an alignment with each other. Finally, I'm going to use the last of the heat to pry apart these handles. So right now they cross over each other in the wrong direction, so I'm going to pull them apart so that they're open like a normal pair of pliers would be. Oh, and if you have a problem with the pliers not wanting to open and close, they're just bound up too tight, put the pliers back in the fire and make sure that the plier body and the rivet heat up. Once they're at heat, bring them out and quench the handles, making sure that the plier body and the rivet are still hot. And then open and close, really work those handles open and close. That should loosen the rivet up and give you plenty of movement. Now my handles are a little bent, so I've brought it over to the vise. And what I'm doing is I'm locking the handle in, and I'm going to be hammering around on the opposing handle and on the plier head to make sure that everything kind of gets tweaked into alignment with each other. I'll do my final alignment and tweaks at the anvil. You can see here I've brought the handles back up to temperature, and I'm using scrolling tongs and my hammer to try to bring these into alignment. I'm also making the decision that I'm going to go with a flush handle design for these pliers. It's not something I've usually made, but since I made the handles a little more delicate, it just seems to fit. So that's the way I'm going to take these. And they're looking pretty good. I like how they came together, and the movement and actuation on the pliers is really good. Now over at the grinder, I'm going to be bringing the handles to the right length and nice and even. I'm also going to be stripping off that rough scale on the outside of the handles to make it more comfortable. And I'll be easing all of the sharp corners around the handle, again, to make it comfortable and easy to use. You don't want it to bite into your hand when you're putting force into the handles. And here are the pliers hot off the grinder. You can still see some scale on this, but that's fine. I'm going for more of a rustic utility look anyway, so the fact that there are still scales, not a problem. I'm also planning to throw these back in the fire to heat up so I can do a hot wax finish on them. But most importantly, they're easy to use. They move appropriately, the jaws or the bits line up really well, and they feel great in the hand. Here's the final product. So I gave it the hot wax finish, and you can see that black blacksmith ironwork kind of a look. I think it looks fantastic. The handles open and close very easily and smoothly, and although they're a bit delicate so you can't put a ton of force into it, I still like how it came out overall. I think they're a good set of pliers. But I thought people probably want to see a beefier set of pliers, so I made these. Using all the same steps and techniques, except for this time I focused more on a lot of power being left in that body and in the handles, and that also led to a less of a reduction in the bit, which made them thicker and beefier, but not as long, so they can't get as much grip as the original pair. From there, I kind of hit my stride, and I went for a pair of pliers that's kind of halfway between tong and pliers. It's got a wider handle set, which is much more like a plier, and a much larger bit than the original two. So this is kind of where you can see the progression of how pliers lead you into making very good tongs. So I just went ahead and made a pair of tongs as well. And this is what I got. So these are legit mini tongs. They're V-bit. I sized them to be able to hold onto square round stock from 3/8 to 1/2 inch. Hopefully it'll make it out on the video, you can see that. and they are totally functional. They open and close actuating really easily with a single hand, and they're extremely comfortable in a hand, even a gloved hand, when they're holding onto the stock that they're sized for. So I hope that this shows you that making pliers is a great way to learn how to make good tongs. And I made all of this stuff with just scraps from my scrap bin. It didn't cost me a thing. Some 3/8 round for the rivets and a couple of pieces of 1/2 inch square, and I was able to make all of these in an afternoon. I hope that was enjoyable for you guys and that you got a kick out of that. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks for coming along on the project, and hope to see you guys in the next video.